You see now, this is what you are. This is who you are. Embrace it, and the pain will end. Cease your resistance. Give me your flesh to wear. You cannot keep my spirit out forever, and when you are mine, I shall give you power beyond your wildest imaginings. This petty empire of man that you have built is nothing to what we might achieve together. There are lands far beyond these shores to be conquered, worlds beyond this paltry rock to be enslaved. Stand at my side, and this entire world will be yours.
Nagash was now in control of his citadel, but was angered beyond mortal comprehension to discover that the warpstone was almost exhausted by Skaven mining. The devices he had used to refine, concentrate, and purify it for his own sorcerous purposes were all destroyed. Even had they not been, there was no longer enough warpstone that he coveted to allow him to recreate the Great Summoning. Undaunted by the armies the Council of 13 sent to reclaim Nagash Saga, the great necromancer set to work. First he laboured in his forges, creating a great metal talon for himself to replace his lost claw. His undead hosts carried out instructions under his supervision to make the device. The artificial claw was cunningly wrought and covered in disturbing runes that hurt the eye. It was as flexible and useful as a normal hand, and many times stronger. Now Nagash could once more hold a weapon with his own hands. He could create more devices, and summon the spirits of the dead, interrogating them for information, and slowly, piece by piece, he reconstructed the events that had taken place during his long absence. He heard of the disappearance of Al-Qadazar, and how he had been driven to madness and death by the crown and exposure to the Skaven's death blade. Eventually, his attention was drawn to the north, where Kadon's heir, Marath, had taken his crown. Wrapping himself in a black cloak and many powerful protective enchantments, Nagash set out in secret for the northern lands, determined to reclaim what was his. Far was his destination, and many were his battles on the hard road to the cold northern lands. Nagash travelled through lands where stalwart dwarf warriors battled orcs and goblins, and where the followers of chaos still lurked. He eventually arrived in the lands of the nascent empire, and took up residence in the long-abandoned ruins of the elf city of Athel Tamara. This was to be his base, from which he would scour the north in search of his crown. From the ruins, Nagash sent messengers, winging out to locate Kadon's heir. But Marath was dead. The evil mage was slain by Sigmar, and the crown was in the possession of the first Emperor of Man. Sensing its utter evil, he refused to use it and kept it under lock and key within his treasure vaults, far from the eyes of those who might be tempted by it.
The dead do not squabble as this land's rulers do. The dead do not fight one another. The dead have no desires, no petty jealousies or ambitions. The world of the dead is a world at peace.
Even as the Empire indulged in a sigh of relief and glorified themselves upon their achievements, the tribes failed to notice the cold winds of death blowing strongly to the south. Even as Sigmar basked himself in his triumphant homecoming victory, far to the south, Count Marcus of the Menegoths was burying the body of his only son until a stranger appeared in the scene. He bore the camel skin of a Nehekaran, yet there was a paleness in his appearance which contrasted with his own skin. In mere moments, the encounter with this swarthy gentleman turned violent, and a hulking undead warrior clad in chaos armor strode through the melee, butchering all of Count Marcus's warriors with violent explosions of vaporous blood. Even as the end drew near, a dark looming shadow appeared behind the two creatures, and as the tanned stranger choked the life out of the Imperial Count, Marcus knew his name, a name which was the very personification of death. The looming shadow was known as Nagash. Words didn't reach Sigmar about the Menegoth's destruction, at least not until the very same caramel stranger met the Emperor, when he came to the woods looking for an ancient weapon known as the organ gun. There the stranger gave Sigmar an ultimatum. Give up the crown of sorcery and serve the will of his master, or his empire shall perish under a flood of dead. Brave Sigmar rejected the creature's claims, and as the creature fled the scene upon a black hellsteed, the Emperor once again rallied the Empire for war. And yet the Empire needed time, and time was against them. As Sigmar rallied his knights and mustered his warriors, the capital of the Menegoths was brought to the ground by the invading hordes of Nagash. Worse still, mighty fleets of undead corsairs plagued the trade lines to the west, blocking off many ships heading towards the growing city of Jutumnasreich. When Sigmar rallied the armies, he came upon the Cherusan settlement of Ostengard, now overtaken by the undead and devastated. Even as the settlement was purged, reports from across the Empire began to stream in that the dead were rising everywhere. Settlements from the southern Middle Mountains were abandoning their homes, and the refugees were streaming into Middenheim in a great flood. Western settlements had begun to be raided by beastmen and brigands, as a foul pestilence and the onset of winter forced these creatures into desperation, in turn smelling easy pickings among the disturbed human settlements. Soon it became apparent that the final battle needed to take place within the gates of Reichdorf itself. Salvation and revelation came for the Empire when Sigmar's most trusted advisor, Eoforth, High Scholar of the Empire, delved deep into the great libraries of Reichdorf. There, a great many of the most useful tomes that had come from the dusty library of Marath, the necromancer of Brass Keep, though copies of translated manuscripts from the far south had come to Reichdorf's great library via the Empire's southern kings. Oral tales told by traders returning from the southern lands of searing deserts, or from across the world's edge mountains, had been painstakingly compiled by the library scribes. There the scholar learned the true being known as Nagash. Nagash was a figure only dimly recalled in ancient legends, and the pages of dusty tomes to the men of the Reich. But Sigmar alone had known the truth of him, for when he faced the necromancer of the Brass Keep, he claimed from him Nagash's fabled crown of sorcery. Through it, the Lord of the Undead sought to entice Sigmar to be his champion, but his magic had proved futile against Sigmar's will, who then placed the crown in a guarded vault under the care of Shalyan priestesses. Inextricably linked with the tale of Nagash was the tale of the crown he had forged, and into which he had bound the essence of his damned soul. This, the ancient tale-tellers agreed, was the source of Nagash's greatest power and his greatest weakness. The manuscript from the burning galley spoke of an ancient warrior named Al-Kadazar, who slew the Lord of Undeath with a dreadful sword of fell power, and cast his bones and crown into a great river. A greenskin invasion had destroyed the city. Everywhere the crown appeared in history, great devastation quickly followed. Terrible invasions, cataclysms of dreadful power, or corruptions of once noble civilizations into barbarism. The crown was a talisman of woe, a bringer of destruction that brought only misery and death wherever it came to light. and it was buried in the heart of Reichdorf. Driven with utter terror, the scholar rushed with all haste to bring his news to Emperor Sigmar before it was too late.
Some, though headless, stood erect. Some, the arms were hacked from. Some were pierced from front to back. And some in horse in their armour sat. Some were choked while at their food. Some were drowned in flood. And some were withered up by fire. Some raving mad and others dead. Merciful Shaliar of the sorrow pours bright tears from her eyes, weeping and wailing the fate of men. Alas, my grief that ye did not heed her cries.
Bloated and swollen by the Menegoth dead, the army of Nagash pressed further north and took the city of Sigurdheim in a matter of days. Thousands of undead warriors had marched up the rugged peak and broke through its defences, and the city fell in a night that held sway over the tribal territories of the cosmopolitan southerners. The Count Sigurd was slain in combat with a vampire, and returned from death as a wight, just as his vassal Count Marcus had before him. Soon, for every victory won, the legions of the undead were growing to near apocalyptic numbers. It was not mere whim that Nagash had divided his forces, for he had sought to deprive the empire of its greatest strength, unity. His forces assailed every province, even as far as the great city of Middenheim. His purpose was not to destroy or conquer, but simply to keep the tribes from riding to the defence of their emperor, even as he rode hard to Reichdorf. Nagash's baleful eyes were turned upon the great capital, for he knew that his ancient crown and his final victory would be found there.
See the fate of all flesh, and no despair. Phenomenal, you wish you were. I am the best I ever been. I tried to be the best of men. You know. Some support by my side could have been